What is FROOMB? Why is FROOMB? These are the questions asked annually at the Bubonicon Sunday auction. This year, we're not holding the auction in person. We are having a virtual auction on our Facebook, which I highly encourage you to check out. But we are still bringing you the mystery, the magic, nay, the horror of FROOMB. And to start this out, I have a review from one of our very own Bubonicon readers. Brilliant. A work of greatness so stellar, so intense, so fundamentally transcendent that it sears a hole in the human heart. Never before have I read a tale of vaporization by electrocution so engaging, so geodesic in its ability to make a statement about the human condition. In fact, never have I read a tale of vaporization by electrocution. FROOMB is the tale of the tribe. It has the power to break through our conceptions of who we are. It may very well change the world, but alas, are we truly ready for FROOMB? I fear not. Perhaps someday. Sarcastically, J.C. Speak. And with that, I hand you off to the man who knows the most about the legend of FROOMB, Robert E. Vardeman.
Hello, Earthlings. How are you? Welcome to the Bubonicon FROOMB 101 course. This is something special. It's something that happens only at Bubonicon. And, well, you might ask, what is that? What is FROOMB? My God, FROOMB! It sounds awful. It sounds wonderful. It is. It's all of those. But first, before we go into the depths of FROOMB, with an exclamation mark, of course, let me give you a little bit of background about the book. Roy Tackett started the Albuquerque Science Fiction Society back in the summer of 1965. He was the one that sort of nudged me into doing Bubonicon, and then he helped it along with a contribution to our auction. That contribution was really, really wonderful. It was a copy of FROOMB, which brings back the point of what is FROOMB? John Lymington's book, FROOMB. It's an acronym that stands for Fluid is Running Out of My Brakes. We have auctioned this off for more years than I can remember, and it carries a special onus or perhaps obligation, depending on how you look at it, to whoever wins the book in auction. They can read it, or more likely now, they can read everyone else's comments that have been written in the margins, in the end papers, all over the place. Harry Morris won it one year. He did an illustration for the book. Most people are more conventional and just put their own comments in it. It's more fun than the book itself. Why would you think that is true? It's a terrible book, but that's okay. It's fun to read. It's fun to think up your own comments. And here from the cover flap of FROOMB is Fluid is Running Out of My Brakes spells FROOMB. That's an acronym for those of you that care about these things. FROOMB could spell disaster for the world, which is quite possible these days. FROOMB, was it heaven or was it hell? John Brunt wasn't too sure, but wherever he was frightened. The newspapers and the government also wanted to know where he was. They suspected that the great scientist David Packard, no relation to Packard of HP, knew where the tough and womanizing adventurer was, but no one calculated that John Brunt had been sent out on the last exploration left to man, an escape into the future. Not even John Brunt could have known the implications of such a terrifying journey until he found himself in the world beyond the present. Through his harrowing adventures, Brunt realizes the holocaust of world he has left behind is about to encounter. But would he be able to return to it before it was too late? Would he be able to remember what he had witnessed on the other side of time? Who cares? It's a crummy book, but it's fun to read. It's fun to make comments. And this is why I'm hoping that you, yes, you very person, you will be able to bid money, like US currency money, and win Froom. If you do, you get to read it over the next year. You get to make more comments in it. And the burden is upon you to return it to the convention next year so we can do all this silliness again. But of course, being virtual, we have to have something a little extra. And that little extra is readings from the book itself, the great book of Froom. I will start out with the reading from chapter 1. This gives you a wonderful launch into understanding exactly why everyone is so taken with Froom.
To interrupt Bob for a moment before he starts his reading, I wanted to bring to you a few of those comments he mentioned. You can see what an example page of the inside of the Froom book looks like here. But those are kind of hard to read, so I'm going to read a few for you. If you know nothing else about bad writing, you could spot this bomb just by its abundance of similes. What's more, many of these similes are ugly and caustic. To demonstrate, I'll turn the device on the author himself and say Mr. Lymington's shallow, unpleasant characters are like putrid tidal pools. His weak grasp of science is like an eruptive viral disease, and his sluggish pacing of the story is like a multiple amputee trying to cross the Sahara. This comment brought to you by Roy B. of Bubonicon 23. Another comment: lacking self-confidence in your writing style? Read a few pages and you will realize how truly subtle and elegant your own efforts are. Don't waste money on workshops, tapes on motivation, or how to write books. Buy Froom today. This is brought to you by Benita G. of Bubonicon 20. And with that, we'll get back to the reading.
1. The sky was a strange color, like dirty copper. There was a stillness around him so absolute that he kept stopping and looking up at the dry, ragged trees sprawling above the road and the high, spiky hedges. They were green, but it was kind of a dusty green, like the blush on a plum. The black tarred road was broken like a crazy paving, grass growing in the cracks, and weeds, like otherworld stick insects, stood feet high. Yet I know it, he said aloud. I know the hills over there. He stared across wild downs to the purple of a range of hills, cutting across a ragged limit line across the copper sky. It is, he said, it bloody well is, but it can't be now, can it? What was the name of this place? Something incredible like Blastard Pie Strumpet in the county of Somerset. Heaven? What the devil am I doing here? Can't be heaven, but it can't be Blastard Pie Strumpet either, or can it? He walked on. The uneven, broken road tried to rick his ankles. He could feel the ache of walking on the stuff all the way up his body. It hurts, he said, but can it hurt in heaven? Something's wrong, but what? Did that ruddy computer miscompute? If so, what has it done to me? I must be alive because it hurts. It's hot and I'm dry. I couldn't feel those things in heaven, or could I? He looked around him again, stopped walking, breathed hard to make sure it felt like air coming into him and then blowing out again hard, as if the sensation might prove something. But he only added the sensations, for his body ached and was thirsty. His feet were hot and pained with the broken road, and oddly, he felt a sexual excitement. But they say you have an orgasm if you die suddenly, he said. So that might not be so strange. I don't know. But surely this is Blastard pie strumpet that I knew? Surely. The trees met across the road in a ragged, sagging arch as he went on. Once this road had been cut through a wood, and now the wood had grown over it again. A sudden wave of excitement surged in him as he remembered something.
A wood by the road. There should be a track going to the right, leading down through birch woods and shivering screens of springing birch to a lake. He remembered it now, and that place where it was cleared a little, and you could look up and see the high wires looping against the sky. Yes, he could remember the line of slender steel pylons like Martian giants striding across the hills. It was strange to see the crazy paving running through a wood with the feet of trees rising through it, trying to touch toes across the once wide way. He went through the darkening wood, and there, overgrown to a point where the track was no more than inches wide, he saw it, his little lane of escape all those years ago. He stopped and looked around him again. "Those years ago," he said to the trees. "How many, for God's sake?" "Only 20. How could this have happened in 20 years? His brain recoiled like a startled snake and then slowly relaxed again. He reached out and touched a tree. Then he hit it with his hand, and it stung. "No, not dreaming, not heaven either. I was born near here," he said, shaking his head. "What did Packard do wrong?" But then he wasn't sure, was he? He didn't know what would happen, but it wasn't this. What is this? He started to run, tearing his way between the bushes and the weeds, following the faint line of his little track that once led to heaven. He stopped and pushed his fingers through his wild hair. "Heaven, heaven, heaven," he shouted. No, not that kind of heaven. That was just a boy's heaven, a place of dreams and rainbow fish and the dragonflies like fairies in the sun. I can smell it. The cool water and rich green trees and the moss and the heat of the sun on that rock. He heard his yelling voice echoing in the vastness of the wild trees. He saw the gray remains of an old gate lurching in the prickles and the weeds, sinking into an enveloping sea. Beyond the gate, there had been a clearing where the Martian giant had stood, legs wide, his mighty crown of insulators high against the summer sky. He stared through the jungle and saw the Martian crumpled, as if its knees had given way.
Its crown was strangled by weeds choking the trees. It was thin and red with rust, hardly distinguishable now in the voracious advance of savage decay. A poor broken thing, so wizened and rotted that it could never have had the majesty he had remembered. He felt tears in his eyes, as if sad for this thing, this ruined part of a remembered dream. He was mad. This was the world of madness. The decay was not around him, but in his mind, showing him a wrinkled, toothless, gibbering mask of age on what must still be the face of youth. 20 years! Only 20 years, he shouted and began to run again. Suddenly, there it was. At the edges, the trees drooped to the water. Weeds trailed like fraying ropes in the deeper shadows at the shores of the rock lake. The water was still. The reflection of the copper sky made it like a burning mirror. But he could smell the coolness and the dank, clinging scent of the vegetation. The awful pain of disappointment filled him, as if the sweetness of life had been suddenly swept away out of reach among the stars, and he was alone in a burning desert, with only the feel of pain and thirst and the exhaustion of despair. It was decay, decay. There had never been youth and freshness and the richness of spring warming into summer. There had only been the sensations of a dreaming brain. 20 years, just 20 years, and there he was, a naked boy lying on his belly on the warm rock, staring down over the edge to the rainbow fish darting in the pool, the sun like the touch of a girl on his body. Desperately, he stepped onto the rock and looked down into the depths of the silent lake. No fish darted. For a moment, he made out nothing but shimmering ghosts under the water. They took shape as he stared, became an iron bedstead, springs, the top of an old iron cooking range, red as desert sand. God! He turned his face to the copper sky. I must be dead. Please, God, I must be dead. That's what David promised. Not this. He turned suddenly and stumbled off the rock. It couldn't be the truth. The computer had been wrong. He was not dead. He could feel and suffer.
Then it's hell, he said, and pushed through the jungle back to the forgotten road. They were wrong. It's hell, not heaven at all. But it was too real for either. He felt and breathed and suffered and thought he was alive. This was not the kind of life that could last 1,000,000 years. This is the life of burning hurt and rapid decay, the only life man knew. He came to the road and turned again to the west, breaking out of the wood between what had once been fields of wheat and barley. Now there were wild weeds and dancing poppies, like painted whores in a world of dry, withering straw. Upon the hill ahead of him there had been a crown of trees. The Druid's Ring, they had called it. Surely it had been on top? His pace increased, as if impatience could find what his eyes could see was not there. But as he rose higher on the broken road, he saw the tops of trees showing above the breast of a hill. A ring no more, but a struggling, spreading blot on the soft hill. The road dived over the brow and entered a forest of young trees. He could not remember whether it had been there before, but he thought it had been fields when he had known it. This was like a great wall of trees, stretching away to right and left. As he went toward it, sounds broke the stillness of the nightmare day. He stopped, startled, almost frightened. "Birds!" he said, his voice tearing in his dry throat. "Birds!" He looked back over his shoulder the way he had come. There weren't any birds down there. Tears began to run down his cheeks, as if the sound of the birds had aroused an emotion so strong that he could no longer control it. He began to run toward the trees and the sound of the birds. The road smoothed, as if at last someone lived in this decayed world who tended it against the weeds. He ran into the world of the trees and the singing birds, and the shadows grew deeper beneath the great green roof of leaves. He ran as fast as he could. 196 pounds of a strong and powerful young man running as fast along the empty road as if escaping from the pursuing ghost of madness.
He heard his feet slapping and echoing, and his breath groaning in his chest, but above all rang the carillons of the bird song in the cathedral of the trees. "The gates of heaven!" he gasped. "David said there would be." From the emptiness of the road, some invisible force punched him in his chest and his belly, as if he had run full tilt into a solid wall. The breath was bounced out of him, and he was paralyzed with the density of a pain that gripped all his muscles. His legs gave way, and he began to fall headlong down to the road. Before he touched it, suffering ended, and the darkness came, just as it had done in the electric chair. He found himself being walked toward a log hut in the trees, a man supporting him on each side. Their hands hurt his arms, and he felt his feet dragging and stumbling on the grass. The sun had come out, and the beams slanted down through the leaves, splashing brilliant translucent greens from their slowly moving planes. The ground was soft, patched with tree shadows on the rich grass, and the air was fresh and sweet with the smells of woodland, cool in the summer day. He had never noticed the colors, the smells, the very feel of the air on his face so richly before. He gained his feet and began to resist the shoving of the men as they came near the hut. The logs of its walls were wrinkled and brown like walnut shells, polished with rain and sun. The moving colors of the woodland and the shimmering of the young beech sparkled in the windows like the sun on rippling water. He felt a need to gasp in air, to drink in the beauty after the sordid decay he had come through. The door of the log hut was open, and he saw a man inside sitting at a table and facing him. "St. Peter," he panted. His two helpers got him to the doorway and then shoved him through. He stumbled and fell again, crashing to the floor in a whirl of pain, clutching at the chair as he went. The chair was pulled down on top of him. One of his 2 helpers came into the hut, lifted the chair off him, and then smashed it down across his back before standing it in the corner.
Jesus, he gasped, the pain searing through him like a white fire. He scrambled up, dizzy with the hurt, and as he reeled back against the wall, he saw the energetic helper come at him and smash at his face with his fist. The blow caught his cheek and jarred his head back against the wooden wall. He stayed a moment, his body rigid at his own command, and then, as the helper came to hit him again, he went forward with both feet widely placed. He drove one fist into the man's belly and the other to his ear. The pain of the blows landing added to the aching mass of his body, but stimulated it. He smashed at the man again. The man dropped his guard and just stood there, backing and gasping with each blow. The traveler hit him like a punching bag until the fellow gave way at the knees and fell down retching. Neither Peter at the desk nor the second helper at the doorway did anything to stop the traveler in his powerful onslaught. They looked at their fallen comrade as he rolled over on the floor and lay there gasping and groaning. Peter cocked his head and looked at the traveler. "What's your name?" he asked. "Brunt," said the traveler, "John Brunt." The helper at the door dragged his companion out of the hut, left him lying in grunting misery out on the grass, and came in again, closing the door to shut out the disturbing sounds of agony. "Your tag," the man at the desk said, holding out his hand. "What tag?" said Brunt blankly. The man let his hand fall to the desk and eyed John Brunt with smooth suspicion. "Where have you come from?" he asked. "I can't answer for the route," said John, "but I started in London. I'll explain it, but tell me one thing first." Peter sat still, watching him. Brunt was a big, powerfully built young man of nearly 30, and something about his appearance, or perhaps his behavior, held the official with a kind of fascination. Peter was smooth, dark-haired, sallow in complexion, with brown eyes of a velvet Brunt could see no light in. "You are Peter?" Brunt said, and held his breath for the answer. The official considered the question. "Call me that if you like," he said quietly, then looked beyond Brunt to the man by the door. "George, if he doesn't stop that row, knock him right out."
"Run," said George, and smiled as he went outside. The groaning stopped. George came back and left the door open behind him. "Heaven," said John Brunt, half to himself. "How did you get here?" Peter said. "I died, you see," John said quickly. "I was killed specifically for the purpose. We didn't know what to expect, but it wasn't this. I used to know this place years ago. I was born here. I know it's the same place." "You were born here?" said Peter, looking him up and down. "Yes, but for the life of me I can't remember the name of it. I know it like my own, but it just won't come." "It hasn't got a name," said Peter. "No?" "No." John could not sort out the confusion of his feelings, and for a moment clung to something that seemed to help. "Well, this is the place I knew," he said reasonably. "It's very different, but it's the place." "And you say you were killed?" "Yes. Being deliberately killed doesn't disqualify you, does it? It was one of the things Packard wasn't sure about. We decided to risk it." "Who is Packard?" "David Packard, Chief Scientific Advisor to the government, Minister of Science. But this is a private experiment. Of course, we realized all along you might have strong objections to this kind of work, but I hope it won't count against me." Brunt felt anxious, even frightened of the possibility. "I don't see why it should count against you," said Peter, watching him. "But I am only a steward. Such decisions don't rest with me. They come from a higher quarter. All I can do is tell them what you say. My duties are to prevent people getting in who have no right to be here, but you say you came from the government?" "Not exactly," said John. "From one of their chief advisors." "And he has sent you here?" "That's it, Professor David Packard." Peter didn't show much interest in Packard. Perhaps he'd not heard of him yet. John realized there must be wide areas of complete blankness in Peter's awareness of names. There could be more people than stars. After all, people probably didn't interest Peter until they arrived at reception. Peter's manner changed. His slow, easy, smooth attitude was suddenly drowned. He picked up a pill bottle, tipped a handful of pills into his palm, and swallowed them. A mathematical ferocity took command of him.
You say you were murdered? It won't disqualify me? Yes or no? Yes. Can you feel anything? Yes. Peter shot the contents of the bottle into John's face. The traveler jumped back, blinking. The bottle struck him on the nose a second later, and he uttered an exclamation of pain. Ow! Peter sat still, watching him. He then took up a pencil and wrote in thick black on a sheet of paper, "Reactions abnormal." "Do you feel short of breath?" Peter said. "No, just short of patience." Peter made a sign to George, who went out through a door into a room behind the desk. "So this man killed you," Peter went on. "Yes." "You still feel normal?" "Yes." "I didn't expect that." "You feel hurt?" "Yes." Peter made scrawling notes with the charcoal pencil, using a sheet of paper for every 6 or 7 words. "You were born here?" "Yes." "Where?" "I can't remember the name. It's gone somehow." "What kind of place?" "A village. It used to be down there, a mile down there." John pointed at the west wall of the hut. "And you think it isn't there now?" "I don't know. I can't see if it is or it isn't." "What kind of house?" "It wasn't a house. It was a pub. An inn. A fine old place going back to the 16th century. It was, I remember now, it was called the Ostlers." Peter sat back, let his pencil fall, and spread his hands, palm down, on the desk. His smooth, sallow face was a mask, but his eyes at last were bright with suspicion. "You were born there?" Peter snapped. "Yes, my father owned the pub. Oliver Brunt. That was my father's name. Funny how I couldn't remember the name of the pub till then." "You lived there?" "Of course. It was very busy. Fashionable even. A lot of VIPs used to stay there for the quiet and comfort." Peter took up his pencil and began writing again. "When did you leave?" he barked. "When I was 19, John Brunt said. "I went with a chap to sail around the world in a 30-foot yacht. I put 2,000 in I borrowed from my father, but the other chap never got around to paying his share. He ran off in Sydney to dodge creditors, and I was left holding the baby and a ticket nailed to the mast. From there,
Your father? He had an accident and died while I was away. That's why there was no money sent to me, and I ended up in jail. Your mother? She married a wealthy customer while I was away. I didn't like him, though I didn't know him well enough to like him one way or another. I just wasn't prepared to like him. I was jealous, I suppose. I never really tried to find out what the feeling was because I was ashamed to feel it anyway." The edge of Peter's sharpness was being blunted by an increasing puzzlement. "What happened to you then?" he asked. "I took a job as a jockey to a flying doctor who lost his license through drink. The curious thing is, he tried most of the time to get me drunk as well when I was flying him. I don't know whether it was bonhomie or just masochism. He was never so happy as when he thought we would crack up. He was a bit biffo. He used to get me to tell him how my creditors were getting near and creeping around the gum trees or hiding down the manholes outside the surgery." Peter's puzzlement increased. "Go on," he said, watching closely. "And then my mother heard about me and money was sent. I'd saved for my wages, and with this remittance, I went out to pay up the creditors, but the doctor got my ear, and we blew the lot between us. Then I used his airplane to get to Tasmania and got a job in the crew of a ship." "Your mother sent you money?" "Yes." "Why?" "Well, she didn't want me to be in trouble. I didn't know my father was dead. She forgot to mention it till some time after, when I found he'd left me 10,000. John had the feeling that his listener didn't understand something, but would not admit it and therefore didn't ask. "But haven't you got this all in the record somewhere?" "George is going to look." George came back suddenly carrying a mug that steamed. He gave it to the traveler. John took the mug gratefully. His dryness had got to a pitch where he could hardly talk without pain. He took a gulp of the hot coffee, and when he had swallowed and the taste permeated his tongue, he started.
Good God, what's that? He said, horrified. Peter's eyes narrowed. Coffee, said Peter watchfully. John felt hot with embarrassment. I'm sorry, that was very ungenerous of me, he said, and took up the mug again, bracing himself to drink more. But George took the mug away and went out again. Don't you drink coffee in London? Peter said. I did, John corrected mildly. Yes. Describe your father. He was a big man, very good figure. He used to dress rather oddly. Frilly silk suits, cravats, mutton chop whiskers, silk knee breeches, and black stockings, shoes with buckles. It was part of the act, he said. Good for business. The whole staff was dressed in period style. George re-entered with another steaming mug. Peter turned to him. Brunt, he said. Yes, said George, as if agreeing. Peter turned back to John. John was eyeing the steaming mug with apprehension, which dissolved as he smelled coffee. George gave him the mug. John drank. Ah, that's better, he said, hiding no doubt about the flavor. Peter and George exchanged glances. Real, said George, staring at Peter. Yes, Peter agreed. George wrenched the mug out of John's grateful hand. Some coffee spilled on the floor. George shoved John hard in the chest. Surprised, John sat heavily in a chair that was behind him. Look, John began, his temper flashing. Sit still, Peter said. There are more questions. George stood against the wall and drank the rest of the coffee as if for want of something to do. A girl came in, tall, dark-haired, and plainly dressed in a kind of Puritan frock, black with white collar. Her green eyes rested on John for a moment, bright, it seemed, with suspicion. She held a thick file under her arm, which she put on the desk in front of Peter. John saw the cover was marked in big black letters. Brunt. Peter opened the file, watching John as he did it. Are you sure that you were killed? The girl watched. The traveler felt an almost electric barrage of searching eyes. Yes, that was the one thing Packard couldn't have made a mistake about. That was the easiest part of it all. I mean, you couldn't possibly make a mistake about killing somebody if you really meant it. Could you?
I hope you've enjoyed this reading of Froom. If you're interested, tempted, compelled to read more of Froom, then please come next year to the Sunday auction, where we will be auctioning off Froom as we do every year when we meet physically. As mentioned earlier, we are not auctioning Froom in the virtual auction, but please do come next year to get your chance to read John Lymington's classic, Froom. To close us out, I want to bring you two more comments from inside the book. It takes a better, person than me to read this book. For 2 years, I've tried to read it. No go. Speed read it? No way. Scan through it? Almost made it. I surrendered to bad writing. Bill M. And then our final comment from Evan at Bubonicon 48. Really? That was the end? I tortured myself for that?